From Instruction to Evaluation by Olivia Drew. Instruction is simply the act of educating. Easier said than done. It's the purposeful direction of the learning process. This typically includes, but definitely isn't limited to, stating learning objectives and setting expectations, introducing new material in an engaging way, calling on any prior knowledge, presentation of new information, or facilitating inquiry-based learning, followed by explicit instruction, having activities prepared for group, partner, or independent practice, review and feedback, and assessment. There are various methods of instruction for different purposes. Inquiry-based learning is student investigation and hands-on activities. The teacher acts as a facilitator and a resource to the students. This is most often done in science classes, though it can be used in other content areas with some specific planning. Direct instruction is a teacher-centered classroom. This typically works best as a component of a larger lesson plan. Flipped classroom, broadly speaking, this is where content is introduced and kind of researched at home. Usually the teacher will make a video for the students to watch, and then assignments will be done in the classroom. Kinesthetic learning is based on the multiple intelligences theory that requires students to actively learn, whether it's drawing, role play, imaginary play, building things, etc. Then differentiated learning, really this should be worked into any method to make learning the content accessible to all students. And this can be done by how students access the content, their activities and projects, their seating arrangement, even altering assessments and assessment style for these students. So to elaborate a bit on differentiated learning, this is a student-centered method of teaching. It relies on data to make the lesson accessible to all students. It's typically low tech, though programs and different things can be used, but it's used to meet the needs of all types of learners. So you don't necessarily change what you're teaching, but you might change how you teach it, the activities that are done. You might use some note cards and labels to help some students along, and then you can also change the way that you assess these students. So to dive a little deeper into assessments, there are formative assessments and summative assessments, which are done in the classroom. Then there are standardized assessments, which can be at the district or state level, something like STAR testing for reading, all the way up to an FSA type of test would be standardized. All assessments must be intentional, valid, and reliable. Formative assessments should be done throughout a lesson or a unit just to kind of monitor where students are and how well they're understanding the content. Summatives can also be done at the end of a lesson. More often than not, they are done at the end of a unit, which is okay too, as long as you have proper use of formatives in between. Often when we think of assessments, we think of pencil to paper, multiple choice, fill in the blank type of assessments, but that's not always the case. A formative assessment is used to monitor student learning, to provide feedback, or to tweak lessons to help students improve upon the skills of that content area that you're focusing on. So different types of formative assessments can include entrance and exit tickets, a quiz like Kahoot. You can observe a think, pair, share session between your students. You can perform student interviews just one-on-one with them to see where they're at. You can ask students to do self-checks, create a little rubric, and let them tell you what they know and what they think they need to work on some more. You could even do something fun like a roll the dice game. For instance, if they roll 1, they would be prompted, I want to remember this from this lesson. If they roll a 2, they could say, I still wonder about ... If they roll a 3, they could say, I already knew, and fill in the blanks, etc. Go from there. So even summative assessments don't have to be boring. They don't have to just be the multiple choice test at the end of a chapter. If you want to do something fun and out of the box for Summative assessment, just create a detailed rubric to give to your students. This will give them a little bit of creative freedom while keeping your expectations very clear. This way, progress can still be measured and it can be compared against a learning objective, standard, or benchmark. So you could do a final project portfolio type of thing. You still could do a multiple choice test. You could let them write an essay or report. You could do a presentation, an ABC book where they have to come up with something on the topic for each letter of the alphabet. And then standardized testing is also considered a summative assessment, kind of the end of the school year wrap up, what all did you learn? Results from assessments should always be tracked. This allows you to monitor your student growth and progress, see what areas students still need to strengthen, what could still be improved upon, and therefore you can create more intentional lesson plans. So to go into that a little bit deeper, what to do with that data, you can differentiate, use the data to determine the skill levels of students and to create activities that kind of cater more towards them. Use it to set goals. You can help your students identify their strengths as well as areas that they feel they can improve upon. And then you can help them set realistic goals for themselves. This will help keep them accountable, give them a little bit of intrinsic motivation. And then you can reflect as a teacher. You can evaluate your own teaching styles, your methods, the instructional programs and technology that you're using to determine what's working and what you maybe could change. So all of that being said, you might have picked up on the fact that instruction, assessment, and data are all very closely related in that they all rely on each other. So you'll teach new content, assess the student's knowledge, track their progress, and then adjust your planning as needed to that. And then you pretty much just start the process over until they show mastery. So unfortunately, not all tests are created equally, and that goes with standardized assessments as well. There are some issues with that. So for one, each state develops its own test. So results are not likely to be consistent, meaning that the nationwide statistics might not be super reliable. Examples and references in these tests may not be very inclusive. Some students in a low SES family, for example, may not have the background knowledge or life experiences to accurately answer the question based on the examples provided. Teacher performance is often judged on these results of standardized testing. While I was researching this, I came across a story from a June of 2019 edweek.org article where Margaret Pastor wrote that she was the principal of a school and a superintendent pointed out that one of her 4 kindergarten classes, the scores were noticeably lower, while in another, the students were outperforming the other 3 classes. So the superintendent recommended that she have the teacher whose class scored lowest work directly with the teacher who seemed to know how to get higher scores from her students, which seems reasonable. But the problem was that the underperforming kindergarten teacher and the higher performing teacher were one and the same person. So it's not always fair or accurate to judge a teacher's performance based on standardized test results. And then finally, these tests only record rote knowledge of math, reading, writing, and science, but they don't include critical thinking skills, problem solving, creative abilities, etc., which are arguably just as important as having the basic content area knowledge. So a few more things to be mindful of when assessing whether it's formative, summative, or standardized. ELLs, they obviously have literacy and language barriers. They also typically lack the academic language literacy that's needed for testing. They won't understand all the cultural references, especially depending on where they're from. And they might have trouble with the time constraints if they are still very new to the language. So there are some things that you can do to kind of combat those hurdles. Creating accommodations for these students is paramount to their success. So whenever possible, you can read the questions and answer choices aloud to students. You can offer them extra time on tests, offer them a translation dictionary. If necessary, if they are new to the States, you could even offer their first couple of tests in their native language, but really you want to expose them to English as much as possible. So students with exceptionalities include students with IEPs and 504s. Um, Often the content is either too simple for these students or not engaging enough for the students. So students with exceptionalities include gifted students with conditions like ADHD, autism, or another special need or learning disorder. And then on the other end of that are students that are struggling to keep up with the content. So the test results of these students, and even the ones that are just not efficient test takers, the test results of these students often reflect issues that have little to do with the content and more to do with their personal challenges. So just to wrap things up really quickly, starting from the top, choose the most effective instruction style for your content and for your students. You know your students best, so choose something that's going to be engaging to all of them while still catering to their needs and how they learn the best. Assess regularly and assess often, both with formative and summatives. Formatives we know are super important to get us to that end goal and to make sure that all of the students are keeping up. Track students' progress using both the formative and summative assessment scores, and then use that data to determine how to move forward. If you need to tweak things, do so. And then in doing so, be mindful of your ELL students and your students with exceptionalities. Make your lesson plans, activities, and assessments accessible to all so that you can be an advocate for their success. Thank you.